The room was beautiful. That was the first cruelty. 12 crystal chandeliers hung over the Aldrich Grand Ballroom like frozen waterfalls, each one throwing light across white tablecloths that cost more to launder than Marisol Vane earned in a week. The flowers were peonies, white and blush, imported from Holland, $340 per arrangement. She knew this because she had chosen them herself, 3 years ago, when this gala was still hers. She sat at table 22, row 3 from the back, not facing the stage. Marisol had arrived at 7:48 p.m. in a navy dress she bought second-hand from a consignment shop on Milwaukee Avenue for $34. Her heels were the same ones she'd worn to her own wedding. She'd polished them that morning in the bathroom of her $890 a month room in Pilsen, kneeling on cold tile, using a paper towel and a dab of olive oil because she had no shoe polish left. The room she rented had one window. It looked out onto a fire escape and a dumpster. The heating cut out every night at 2 a.m. Nobody at table 22 knew any of this. To them, she was simply the quiet woman who had arrived alone, ordered water, and hadn't touched her bread roll. The gala, Chicago Horizon Legacy Awards, had been Marisol's idea in 2021. She had sketched the concept on the back of a coffee shop receipt, a charity event honoring leaders in urban development and social housing. She had written the mission statement. She had cold-called the first 6 sponsors. She had stayed up 4 nights straight, designing the seating chart for the inaugural year because the event planner Caden hired quit with 1 week's notice, and Marisol simply refused to let it fall apart. By year 2, it raised $2.3 million for affordable housing in Chicago's South Side. By year 3, Caden's name was the only one on the masthead. By this year, her name wasn't in the program at all. She had checked, twice. Standing in the lobby before entering, running her finger down the acknowledgements page under the gold chandelier light. Nothing. Not a single line. 4 years of work, and she had been edited out like a typo in a press release. She closed the program and walked to table 22. Around her, Chicago's wealthiest circled each other with champagne flutes and practiced smiles. She recognized most of them. The Aldrich family, who had once asked her to personally recommend a restaurant for their anniversary. The Pryor Group partners, who had shaken her hand at last year's event and called her the real engine behind this whole thing. They didn't recognize her tonight, or they chose not to. Both were equally likely. At 8:11 p.m., the lights dimmed slightly and the MC, a local news anchor from WGN, stepped to the podium. The room settled. Marisol straightened in her chair. She set her water glass down slowly. Her hands were steady. She had practiced this. Not the sitting still that came naturally now after everything, but the breathing, the specific kind of breathing that meant, I am here, I am watching, and I am not afraid. 2 seats to her left, a woman in red was leaning to her companion and whispering something about the centerpiece flowers. Marisol almost told her they were Holland peonies. Instead, she looked at the stage. The MC began the introductions for the evening's first award. Marisol's phone buzzed once against her thigh. She didn't look at it. She already knew who it was. Stellan had sent his last message at 7:55 p.m. We're in position. Table 19 confirmed. Diva called 20 minutes ago. Everything is ready. She had read it in the cab and then turned her phone face down on the seat. She thought of Diva then. 71 years old, in a hospital bed in Albuquerque, New Mexico, 3 days after a cardiac episode, insisting to the nurse that she needed to make a phone call because my niece has something important tonight and she needs to know I'm watching. The nurse had let her. Of course she had. Nobody said no to Dava Osman. Marisol had cried on the phone that night, quietly, the way she had learned to cry, without sound, pressing her palm flat against her mouth. Dava had said, "Don't you dare stop now, not when we're this close." She hadn't stopped. The first award was presented. Applause rose and fell. Marisol watched the stage with the calm focus of a woman who had already accepted that tonight would change everything, and had made peace with every version of how it might end. At 8:43 p.m., Caden Vane walked in from the left entrance. He was wearing the charcoal Brioni suit, the one she had picked out for him at Neiman Marcus on Michigan Avenue in October 2022. He was laughing at something the man beside him had said. His laugh was effortless and practiced and warm, the way a fireplace in a magazine looks warm, beautiful, and giving off no actual heat. He didn't look toward table 22. She hadn't expected him to. But the woman on his arm, tall, in a gold backless gown, leaning into him with the easy confidence of someone who had never once doubted her right to be in a room. That woman turned her head slowly and scanned the audience the way people scan a crowd when they want to be seen doing it. Rienne Castor, 34 years old, daughter of the Castor Group. The woman Caden had transferred a $5.2 million penthouse to on February 3rd, while Marisol was recovering from her second miscarriage 2 floors above in the same hospital. Marisol's jaw tightened for exactly 3 seconds. Then she let it go. She reached into her clutch, closed her fingers around the small black USB drive, and waited. There is a particular silence that grows inside a person who has been told over and over that they are lucky to be where they are. Marisol Vane, born Marisol Reyes, had heard that sentence in many different forms since she was 11 years old. From the foster coordinator at DHS Tulsa, who placed her with her third family in 18 months. From the high school guidance counselor, who was genuinely surprised she'd applied to Northwestern. From the financial aid office that flagged her application for review 3 separate times because her documentation was, in the coordinator's words, atypically complex for a student of your background. From Caden Vane, 6 months into their relationship, over dinner at Alinea in Chicago. You know, most women in your position wouldn't have made it this far. She had smiled and said thank you. Later, alone in the bathroom, she had looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. She wasn't sure, even now, what exactly she had been looking for. Permission, maybe, or a sign that the person she thought she was existed somewhere outside her own head. She had grown up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the second child of a woman who worked double shifts at a laundromat on North Peoria Avenue, and a man who left before Marisol was old enough to form a clear memory of his face. She had one photograph, a blurry Polaroid of a man holding an infant on a porch. She had no idea if that was her. She kept it anyway. Her mother, Rosario Reyes, died of pneumonia in February of the year Marisol turned 11. No health insurance. 3 days between the first symptom and the last breath. Marisol remembered sitting in the hallway of St. Francis Hospital in a plastic chair with a broken leg, holding her older brother's hand, counting the floor tiles because she couldn't think of any other way to make time pass. After that, there were families. Not bad people mostly, just people who had not expected the particular difficulty of Marisol, who was quiet in a way that felt like challenge, who read constantly, who corrected her math teacher in 6th grade and could not understand why that was a problem. She won a full scholarship to the University of Oklahoma at 17. She studied finance and economics. She graduated 4th in her class. She was accepted into the master's program at Northwestern Kellogg School of Management. She was 2 semesters from completing it when the supplemental fee notice arrived. $1,200 for laboratory access and administrative processing. Her scholarship did not cover supplemental fees. She had $214 in her checking account. She asked for an extension. The department declined. She left the program in November. She moved to Chicago with $1,800 in savings and found a job as a junior financial analyst at a mid-size firm on the Sal Street. She was good at it. She was very good at it. Her supervisor told her at her 6-month review that she had the most precise instinct for identifying structural vulnerabilities in financial documents that he had seen in 20 years. He gave her a $2,000 bonus. She cried on the bus home. Not because of the money. She met Caden Vane at a fundraising dinner in March 2019. He was 44 and recently divorced. She was 27 and had never owned furniture she hadn't found on a sidewalk or bought at a goodwill. He was funny and sharp and paid attention when she talked, really paid attention, the way most people in rooms like that one did not. He asked her what she thought about the current commercial real estate market. She told him. He looked at her the way people look at something they didn't expect to find interesting. They had dinner 2 weeks later, and then again. By summer, she was spending weekends at his apartment in the Gold Coast. By fall, she had left her LaSalle Street job at his suggestion. He had a position for her at Vane Orchard, he said, something appropriate to her skill set. The position was Records Management Coordinator, 3rd floor, no window. Salary, $38,500. She took it. She was in love. She told herself the rest would follow. In February 2020, he proposed at the restaurant where they'd had their first date. The ring was a 3-carat cushion cut. The contract his lawyers presented 3 weeks later was 42 pages. She signed it at 11 p.m. in a conference room at the Langham Hotel, with no lawyer of her own, because Caden had said, gently, that it was just a formality, something the company's legal team required for liability purposes, and that questioning it would make things unnecessarily complicated. She did not question it. She had learned, by then, the particular cost of asking the wrong questions at the wrong time. What Caden did not know, what no one knew, was that 11 days before she signed that contract, Marisol had already made a phone call to Albuquerque, New Mexico. She had explained, in careful detail, what she needed. And Dava Osman had said, "Tell me the name of the lawyer you want to use, and give me the amount. I'll handle the rest." The first miscarriage happened on a Thursday afternoon, in October of the year they'd been married 18 months. Marisol had been at her desk on the 3rd floor of Vane Orchard's LaSalle Street headquarters when the cramps started. She had thought at first it was stress. She'd had a bad week. A senior manager had forwarded one of her analysis memos to the wrong distribution list with a note that said, FYI from Caden's wife, she's trying. The emphasis on trying had not been subtle. She had stared at the forwarded email for 4 minutes and then closed her laptop and gone back to work. But this was not stress. She called Caden from a bathroom stall at 2:17 p.m. The call went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She sent a text. I need you. Something's wrong. She took a cab to Northwestern Memorial, alone, called out her address to the driver in a voice that was trying very hard to be level, and sat in the back seat watching Chicago slide past the window. Caden called back at 6:44 p.m. She had been in the hospital for 4 hours. The procedure had already been completed. He said he was sorry. He said he'd been in a board meeting that ran over. He said, and she would remember this word choice for years, "These things happen, Mari. The doctors will tell you there's nothing anyone could have done." She said she knew. She did not say, "I needed you to pick up the phone." He sent flowers to the apartment the next day, white roses. The card said, "You're stronger than you know." She threw the flowers away. She kept the card for 2 days, rereading it, trying to figure out if it was kind or if it was something else entirely. On the 3rd day, she threw that away too. She went back to work the following Monday. Nobody at Vane Orchard knew she had been pregnant. She hadn't told anyone. Caden hadn't told anyone. It was, they had agreed, private. Looking back, she understood that private had meant something different to each of them. The second miscarriage came 14 months later, in January. She was at home when it started. She was alone. Caden was in New York for a development summit that she had prepared all the briefing materials for. She called a cab herself again. She checked herself in herself. She spent the night herself. The next morning, at 10:47 a.m., she would know this time because she later obtained the document. Caden was in a conference room at a law firm on Wacker Drive, signing the transfer papers for the Streeterville penthouse. $5.2 million in property transferred to Rien Castor. Marisol did not know this yet. At 2:15 p.m. that same afternoon, white tulips arrived at her hospital room. The card said, "You need to rest. I've got everything handled." She had looked at those flowers for a long time. Something in her chest had shifted. Not broken, shifted. like a tectonic plate moving a fraction of an inch. The kind of movement that doesn't register until years later, when you look back and realize that was the moment everything changed direction. She did not cry. She had made a decision sometime during that second long night alone that she would not spend any more of herself on things that could not hold what she poured into them. She began keeping notes, small things at first, dates and times and dollar amounts she happened to encounter in documents that passed through her desk on the third floor. Numbers are honest, she had always believed that. Numbers don't perform, they simply are. And the numbers she was seeing gradually, over weeks and then months, were telling a story that no one in this building wanted her to read. She called Stellan Rowe for the first time in 4 years on a Tuesday night in March from a payphone at a 24-hour laundromat on Cermak Road because she did not want the call on any device Caden could access. Stellan picked up on the second ring. She told him nothing specific. She simply said, "I need someone I can trust who understands financial law." There was a pause. Then he said, "I still have your number. I've had it the whole time." She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Don't use it yet. I'll contact you when I'm ready. It might be a few months." It was 8 months. The day Caden called her into the boardroom and terminated her position in front of 14 executives, many of whom had attended her wedding, had eaten her food, had asked her advice and complimented her work, and then carefully forgotten all of it. She sat very still. She said, "I understand." She signed the separation paperwork. She collected her single box of belongings, no photographs on her desk, she had never allowed that, and walked to the elevator. In the lobby, she stopped at the security desk and returned her badge. The guard, a man named Terence who had worked there for 6 years and who was the only person in the entire building who had never once made her feel invisible, looked at her and said quietly, "They're going to regret this, Miss Vane." She nodded once, and then she walked out into the February cold, turned left on LaSalle, and started planning. The room in Pilsen cost $890 a month and had no closet. There was a metal rod screwed into the wall above the radiator where Marisol hung her clothes. 4 blouses, 2 pairs of slacks, the navy dress she had bought for $34 at a consignment store on Milwaukee Avenue, a winter coat from Target, shoes in a row along the baseboard, toes against the wall, the way her mother had taught her to keep a small space from feeling chaotic. She moved in on February 11th with 2 suitcases and a second-hand laptop she bought for $180 from a student selling it on Craigslist. The heat cut out every night at 2 a.m. The window in the bathroom didn't close all the way. The neighbor above her practiced guitar, badly, and always between 10 p.m. and midnight. The water pressure in the shower was a whisper. She loved none of it and complained about none of it. She simply worked. The first week was the hardest, not because of the cold or the noise or the thin walls. It was hard because silence, real silence, the kind that exists when no one is watching you, no one is tracking your whereabouts, no one is recalibrating their behavior based on what you might do next, turned out to feel like falling. She had been under surveillance so long that its absence felt like a floor giving way. She sat on the edge of the mattress on her 3rd night and looked at her phone. Caden had not called. He had sent one text, the day after she moved out, that read, "The legal team will be in touch regarding the formalities." That was all. 4 years of marriage, 1 sentence about formalities. She opened her laptop. She worked until 4 a.m. The financial architecture of Ashford Meridian Trust had taken her 3 years and 7 months to construct. It had begun with $14,000, her first year's savings from the Vane Orcutt salary, set aside in cash in a safety deposit box at a Chase branch on Western Avenue that Caden had no knowledge of. Every month she had funneled a small, irregular amount, never the same figure twice, never a round number, always under $800 to avoid automatic flagging, into the safety deposit box. Then, quarterly transfers to a personal account at a credit union in Nashville under her pre-marriage name, Marisol Reyes. From Nashville to a holding company called Grayfield Solutions LLC, registered in Austin, Texas, with a registered agent service that handled correspondence. From Grayfield to Ashford Meridian Trust, administered by a law firm in Nashville, she had vetted for 14 months before making contact. The trust's named beneficiary and administrator, Dava Osman, retired accountant, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Total accumulated, $140,000 over 4 years. Invested through the trust across 7 positions, 3 of which were in small tranches of publicly traded Vane Orchid stock, purchased at intervals designed to stay beneath the SEC's standard disclosure thresholds, but structured, with Stellan's analysis, to cross those thresholds the moment they were consolidated. 29.4% voting interest. Enough to trigger mandatory board disclosure. Enough to require a seat at the table. She had built all of this in the cracks of a life that was designed to leave her no room for anything at all. On her 4th night in Pilsen, she called Dava. It was 10:30 p.m. Chicago time, 9:30 p.m. in Albuquerque. Dava answered on the first ring, the way she always did. "Tell me everything," Dava said. So she did. All of it. The boardroom. The 14 faces. The signed separation paperwork. The box with no photographs. Terence at the security desk. Dava listened without speaking until Marisol finished. Then she said, "How much time do you need?" 28 days, Marisol said. The gala was March 15th. "I'll be ready," Dava said. "Don't lose your nerve." "I won't. I know you won't. I raised you to be your mother's daughter, and Rosario Reyes never lost her nerve in her life." Marisol pressed her hand flat against the wall beside the metal clothing rod, felt the cold plaster beneath her palm. There was one more complication she had not yet told anyone about. 5 days after she moved to Pilsen, she received a certified letter from Caden's legal team. The letter stated that he had engaged a private investigative firm to review, quote, "any and all financial activities conducted by Marisol Vane during the marriage that may constitute misappropriation of marital assets." He had noticed, apparently, a pattern of small cash withdrawals. His lawyers had flagged it. She had 28 days to act before his investigator found the Nashville account. She set the letter on the corner of her makeshift desk, the plank of wood balanced between 2 stacked boxes, and stared at it for a long time. Then she opened her laptop, typed a single-sentence email to Stellan Rowe, and hit send. "Move everything to Phase 3. We go early." Stellan Rowe arrived at the coffee shop on 18th Street in Pilsen at 7:02 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in mid-February, carrying a paper bag from a bakery 2 blocks away and wearing a flannel shirt in dark navy blue that was at least 8 years old. Marisol saw it from across the window before she saw his face. She had been nursing a black coffee at the corner table for 20 minutes, watching the door with the specific attention of someone who has learned not to assume that people who say they are coming will actually come. When the door opened and the flannel appeared, something in her shoulders lowered approximately 1 inch. She had not realized they had been up. Stellan sat down across from her and pushed the paper bag to the center of the table. He looked older than she remembered. Not worse, just more settled, the way good wood looks when it's been weathered without being damaged. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow that hadn't been there in 2018. "You look terrible," he said. "I know," she said. "I brought you a cinnamon roll. You always used to eat when you were stressed." "I haven't been eating." "I know, that's why I brought 2. She almost said something then, something that would have been honest and complicated, and probably not useful at 7 a.m. in a coffee shop in Pilsen. Instead, she opened the paper bag and took out a cinnamon roll and ate half of it in silence while he took off his coat. They had been friends at University of Oklahoma from 2010 to 2014. He had been studying accounting and tax law. She had been studying finance. They had met in a study group for corporate taxation that neither of them technically needed, but both attended because the professor was exceptional. He was from Bartlesville, Oklahoma, 60 miles north of Tulsa, and he was the only person in her university years who had never once made her feel that her background was something to be managed. They had stayed in contact for 2 years after graduation, and then Caden came. She didn't have to explain it. Stellan had watched it happen from a distance, with the particular helplessness of someone who understands exactly what's occurring and knows that saying so will cost them the friendship. He had said one thing once, in the winter of 2019. Make sure you have something that's just yours. She had said she would. He had nodded and said he hoped she meant it. When she had finally emailed him on March 3rd, using a new Gmail account created specifically for this communication from the library on Damon Avenue, he had responded in 12 minutes. Tell me where and when. Now she spread 7 documents across the table between their coffee cups. A summary of the Ashford Meridian Trust structure, 2 quarterly investment statements, a redacted SEC disclosure analysis prepared by the Nashville law firm, a timeline of Caden's cash transfers and property transactions from the past 14 months, and a single page with 14 names, the current Vane Orchid board members with 3 highlighted in yellow. Stellan read without speaking. He was the kind of reader who went still when something mattered. No fidgeting, no nodding, just eyes moving and the quiet behind them getting deeper. After 11 minutes, he set the last page down. The 3 highlighted names, he said. You know them personally? I organized their children's charity gala invitations for 3 years, she said. I know what their spouses drink. I know which one is quietly looking for an exit from the board because he doesn't like what Caden has been doing with the Midwest development expansion. His name is Harold Finch. He is 71 years old, and he has been on that board for 14 years, and he voted against the Castor merger 3 times. Stellan looked at her. You've been building this for 4 years. 3 years and 7 months. A pause. You emailed me 8 months ago. The account was set up to send automatically. I wasn't sure I'd be ready to tell you then, but I needed the mechanism in place in case I was. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a CTA bus slid past the window. The coffee shop radio was playing something low and country, a woman's voice saying something about roads that don't go back. There's something else, he said. It was not a question. She told him about the private investigator, the certified letter, the 28-day window. He closed his eyes for exactly 4 seconds. Then he opened them and said, Okay, what do you need from me? 3 things. She folded her hands on the table. Access to the WGN press contact you mentioned having, a conversation with Harold Finch before March 15th, and for you to be at table 19 on the night. Table 19. There will be 3 SEC officials seated there. They won't know why they're being seated next to you until you introduce yourself. He looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes without looking away. The flannel shirt, she said. You still have it. He glanced down at the fabric. I never got rid of it. She didn't say anything more about it. She picked up her coffee and looked out the window at 18th Street, waking up in the grey February morning. The bodega shutters rolling up, a man walking a dog with 3 legs, a woman pushing a cart of laundry in the cold. What she did not say, what she had not yet allowed herself to say out loud to anyone, not even Dava, was that there was a drawer in her room in Tilson that she had not opened in 16 days. Inside, it was a photograph from Santa Monica in 2019, and a question she couldn't yet answer, whether the man in it had ever been real, or whether she had simply loved the idea of him so completely that she had agreed to become invisible in order to keep it. The phone rang at 3:14 a.m. on March 11th. Marisol was awake. She had been awake since 1:30 a.m. when the heat cut out, and she had wrapped herself in her coat and kept working at the plank desk by the light of the laptop screen. She was cross-referencing Caden's 2021 and 2022 capital allocation reports against the Castor Group's publicly filed disclosures, looking for the specific transaction that she knew existed but had not yet found in a form that was clean enough to hand to the SEC. She found it at 3:09 a.m. When the phone rang 5 minutes later, she already knew from the area code, 505. Albuquerque. The hospital was calling on Diva's behalf. Diva had been admitted 4 hours earlier with an irregular heartbeat and elevated cardiac markers. She was stable. She was asking for Marisol. Marisol sat very still for 11 seconds. She looked at the screen. She looked at the phone. She closed the laptop. She booked the first available flight to Albuquerque, departing O'Hare at 6:20 a.m., landing at 9:47 a.m., and started packing. It took her 4 minutes. She had learned to travel light. The cab to O'Hare cost $47. She sat in the back and watched the expressway lights slide overhead and did not think about March 15th. She thought about a kitchen in Albuquerque that smelled like green chili and coffee, where a woman with thick grey hair and very precise handwriting had sat across from a 23-year-old Marisol Reyes and said, without any preamble, "You are not lucky to have survived. You worked to survive. Those are not the same thing. Don't ever let anyone confuse them for you." She arrived at the hospital at 10:15 a.m. Diva was in a private room, connected to a cardiac monitor, wearing a hospital gown over a long-sleeved undershirt because she had insisted on it. Her reading glasses were on the bedside table. There was a crossword puzzle, half finished, on the tray beside her water cup. "You didn't have to come," Diva said when Marisol walked in. "Don't," Marisol said. She sat in the chair beside the bed and took Diva's hand. They sat without speaking for a while. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Through the window, Albuquerque in March was grey-brown and vast, and utterly unlike Chicago. "The file," Diva said eventually. "I found what I needed last night," Marisol said, "before they called me." "The Castor transaction?" "Yes." "Good." Diva squeezed her hand once. Her grip was still strong. "The blue tin is in the kitchen, second shelf. Do you remember the combination?" "Your mother's birthday." "Don't forget the USB inside the tin. It has the complete trust documentation and the consolidated share register, everything the Nashville lawyers sent since November." She paused. "It's a backup of the backup." "Diva, I know, but I want you to have it in your hands before Saturday." Marisol looked at her. The precise set of her jaw, the controlled calmness that she had somehow inherited despite sharing no blood with this woman at all. Diva Osman had been her mother's closest friend, had driven 4 hours from Albuquerque to Tulsa the week Rosario died, had sat in a plastic hospital chair and held 11-year-old Marisol's hand, and had said something that Marisol had thought about more times than she could count. "Your mother built everything from nothing. You come from that. Remember it." She had not been there for the foster homes, or the financial aid office, or the $1,200 gap that ended her master's degree. But she had been there in every way that mattered. A voice on the phone at 2 a.m., a safety deposit box key mailed in a plain envelope, a trust structure administered quietly from a house in Albuquerque by a retired accountant who believed in compound interest, and in her niece in roughly equal measure. Marisol flew back to Chicago the following morning. She stopped at Diva's house first, retrieved the blue tin from the second kitchen shelf, took the USB, and left an envelope of cash on the counter for the neighbor who was looking after the house. She stood in Diva's kitchen for 3 minutes and breathed in the smell of green chili and coffee that she associated more with safety than anywhere else she had ever been. On the flight back, she opened her laptop and emailed Stellan. "Diva is stable. I have everything. Are we ready?" His reply came before they reached cruising altitude. Harold Finch confirmed. "Press contact confirmed. Table 19 is set. We're ready." She closed the laptop and looked out the window at the flat Midwest below, brown fields and silver rivers and the geometry of small towns. What she did not know yet, what no one had thought to tell her, because no one had thought it mattered, was that Rienne Castor had, 2 days earlier, hired her own lawyer. Not because of Marisol, because of a property deed she had found in Caden's study that bore her signature on a document she had never seen before, authorizing a secondary transfer of $1.4 million from the penthouse equity to a third account she did not recognize. At 9:14 p.m., the MC returned to the podium with the particular brightness of a man who had been told that the next award was the evening's centerpiece. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chicago Horizon Legacy Awards are proud to present this year's Visionary Leadership Award. This honor recognizes an individual whose commitment to transforming urban communities has set a standard for the entire industry. Marisol sat at table 22 and watched. Please welcome to the stage Mr. Caden Vane, Chairman and CEO of Vane Orchid Capital. Applause. The kind of applause that fills a room because the room is full of people who need to be seen, applauding in the right moments. Caden stood from table 2, front, center, close to the stage, and buttoned his Brioni jacket and began his walk with that ease she had catalogued so precisely over 4 years. The slight forward lean, the nod to 3 people by name as he passed, the way he managed to make every step read as effortless while leaving no doubt that he was the most important person currently moving. He reached the stage. He shook the MC's hand. He took the award, a rectangular block of glass with a gold interior, and held it the way trophies are held by men who have held many trophies. "I want to share this moment," he said into the microphone, "with someone very special to me." He turned towards stage left and extended his hand. Rihanna Castor walked out. Gold backless gown, exactly as tall as the moment required. She moved with the assurance of someone who had rehearsed this, not the walk, but the right to walk it. She took his hand. She stood beside him. She turned to face the audience. Caden looked at her. He put his hand on her back. He leaned in and kissed her. On the mouth, slowly, with the camera trained directly on them, and the WGN feed broadcasting to every screen, at every table, and to every home in the Chicago metro area tuned to local programming. The applause died at approximately the 4-second mark. What replaced it was not quite silence. There were people who caught their breath too loudly, a glass that was set down without care, the specific ambient noise of 400 people recalibrating what they were allowed to show on their faces. Table 2, front and center, was where the Vane Orchid board members sat. Harold Finch, 71 years old, 14-year board veteran, had already placed both hands flat on the tablecloth. At table 19, third row, right side, 3 individuals in grey and navy suits exchanged a glance that meant something specific and professional. And at the press table near the left wall, Stellan Rowe stood up from his chair, walked to the secondary microphone used for press announcements, and said in a voice that was entirely calm, "My name is Stellan Rowe. I'm an independent certified financial examiner. I'd like to invite the 3 individuals at table 19 to review a document that's been prepared for SEC consideration regarding certain share transfer activities connected to the Ashford Meridian Trust and Vane Orchid Capital." He set a manila envelope on the table in front of him. The room went from almost silence to actual silence. Caden turned from the podium. He looked at Stellan. His face did something that Marisol had seen only twice before. The face he made when something happened that he had not accounted for. The calculation ran across him like current. Then, from the main entrance of the Aldrich Grand Ballroom, not the stage entrance, not the side door, but the main entrance where every guest had walked in, where the photographers had been positioned all evening, Marisol Vane walked in. She was wearing the navy second-hand dress. She did not rush. She did not scan the room for Caden. She walked the center aisle between tables with the straightness of a woman who had decided, some time ago, that she was done apologizing for the space she occupied. She reached table 2. She looked at Harold Finch. He looked back at her. She set the small black USB drive on the tablecloth in front of him. Then she pulled out the empty chair at the head of the table, the chair that had been empty all evening because no one had been assigned to it, which was not an accident because she had seen the seating chart, and sat down. She folded her hands. She said nothing. She didn't need to. On the stage, Rihanna Castor had taken 3 steps back from Caden and was looking at something on her phone, something her lawyer had sent 11 minutes ago, a forwarded document, 4 pages, that explained in precise legal language exactly how Caden Vane had used her name and signature to authorize a transfer she had never agreed to. Rihanna looked up from the phone. She looked at Caden, and she said, quietly but into a live microphone, "What is this?" What happened next took 11 minutes. It felt like much longer. Rihanna Castor's question, "What is this?" hung in the air of the Aldrich Grand Ballroom for approximately 3 seconds before Caden reached for the microphone with the instinct of a man who had been managing optics for 20 years. He said, "Rien, this isn't." She stepped back. One step. It was the smallest possible gesture, and it said everything. "We should take this off stage," Caden said. His voice was still modulated, still recognizably his voice. The control in it was remarkable. But the room had heard, "What is this?" and the room was not going to forget it. Rien did not move off stage. She was reading her phone. Her lawyer had by now sent 3 follow-up messages. Her expression was not the expression of a woman who had been betrayed emotionally. It was the expression of a woman who had just understood the full dimensions of a contractual problem she had not known she was inside. She looked up at Caden. "You put my signature on a secondary transfer authorization for $1.4 million. Her voice was level and precise. "I never signed that document." Caden said, "That is not the appropriate venue to—" "I never signed it," she said again. She was not performing. She was stating a fact with the efficiency of someone who had gone, in the space of 11 minutes, from his partner to a witness against him. At table 19, the 3 SEC officials had opened Stellan's envelope. One of them was already on a phone, speaking quietly, his body angled slightly away from the room. At table 2, Harold Finch picked up the USB drive Marisol had set in front of him. He looked at it. He looked at Marisol, sitting at the head of the table with her hands folded. He said quietly, "How long?" "The consolidated position is dated November 14th, she said. 29.4% voting interest. Ashford Meridian Trust." Harold Finch was quiet for a moment. He was the kind of man who had spent 50 years being the person in the room who decided what was true and what was performance. He set the USB drive down on the tablecloth and nodded once. He picked up his phone and called the board's general counsel. At the podium, Caden was attempting to recover. He was saying something about due process, something about the appropriate channels, something about this being a private matter that had been deliberately mischaracterized. He was still using the full arsenal, the voice, the bearing, the lexicon of a man who has never lost in a room. But the room had shifted beneath him. You could feel it the way you feel a ship listing, not a dramatic tilt, just the slow, unstoppable physics of something that is no longer level. Rien walked off stage. She did not say goodbye to him. She simply left the stage, in the gold backless gown, in full view of the WGN camera, and walked to a table near the back where she sat alone and continued reading her phone. It was the most devastating possible thing she could have done. Not a scene, not tears, just departure. Caden stood at the podium alone. The MC had retreated to the side of the stage with the particular expression of a professional whose job requires him to have no expression. The glass award was still on the podium. No one had picked it up. Marisol watched from her chair at table 2. She did not look at Caden. She had not looked at him once since she walked in. She understood by instinct or by training that looking at him would reframe the evening as being about the two of them. This was not about them. This was about what was true. At 9:41 p.m., Caden stepped away from the podium and walked toward the side exit. He passed table 22 on the way. He stopped. He looked at the empty chair where Marisol had been sitting earlier in the evening. He stood there for a moment that went on too long. Then he looked up and found her at table 2, at the head, where she was speaking quietly with Harold Finch and the board's general counsel, who had arrived at the table in the last 3 minutes. Their eyes met. She looked at him the way you look at something that was once important to you and is now simply a fact to be managed. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with the kind of clarity that only comes after you have stopped hoping that something will be different than it is. He walked out. At 10:02 p.m., Stellan sat down in the empty chair beside Marisol at table 2. He set a cup of coffee in front of her. She hadn't asked for it. He'd brought it anyway. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The WGN camera, still rolling, captured a moment that would be shared across every major Chicago news platform by 11 p.m. The image of Marisol Vane sitting at the head of table 2 in a $34 navy dress, speaking calmly to the Vane Orchard Board's general counsel, while on the stage behind her, The Glass Visionary Leadership Award sat unclaimed on the empty podium, and the room full of Chicago's wealthiest citizens sat very quietly and began to understand exactly who had been running things all along. Justice, Marisol would later think, does not arrive with the sound of trumpets. It arrives with the sound of a fax machine. Specifically, the sound of the SEC's formal investigation notice printing in the offices of Vane Orchard Capital's legal department at 7:43 a.m. on Tuesday, March 18th, 3 days after the gala. The investigation covered 3 distinct areas: the February 3rd property transfer, while marital assets were under contestation, the unauthorized use of Rienne Castor's signature on secondary transfer documentation, and a pattern of undisclosed related party transactions between Vane Orchard and the Castor Group dating back to Q3 of the previous year. Caden had spent the weekend in the Gold Coast apartment, his name only post-divorce filing, with his attorney and a crisis communications consultant. He had issued a statement on Sunday, calling the events at the gala a coordinated misrepresentation by a disgruntled former employee, which his attorney had apparently advised against and which he had insisted on anyway. The statement was picked up by the Chicago Tribune, the Sun-Times, and WGN News, none of whom had any trouble finding the footage of Rienne Castor saying, "I never signed that document," into a live microphone. Rienne Castor filed her own civil suit on Monday morning. Her attorneys alleged fraudulent use of identity in a financial instrument, breach of the agreed partnership arrangement, and, in a detail that the Tribune found particularly newsworthy, the discovery of a third property, a condominium in Lincoln Park, transferred to a name that was neither Marisol's nor Rienne's, but belonged to a 26-year-old event coordinator from River North, whose number appeared 340 times in Caden's call log over the preceding 18 months. The Castor Group announced the termination of all merger discussions with Vane Orchard on Tuesday afternoon. The announcement was one paragraph. It contained no explanatory language. Vane Orchard stock dropped 18% over 4 trading days. On March 22nd, the board met in emergency session. Harold Finch called Marisol at 4:30 p.m. to tell her the result. 9-5, Caden Vane removed as chairman and CEO, effective immediately. Pending legal review, the board was establishing a transition committee. Finch asked whether she would consider a consulting role during the transition. She told him she would think about it. She thanked him and hung up. She was sitting in a coffee shop on 18th Street, the same one where she and Stellan had spread documents across the table 6 weeks earlier. She set the phone down beside her coffee cup and looked out the window at the street. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once the prenuptial agreement came under challenge. Her attorney, her own attorney, engaged in January with the first payment drawn from the Nashville account, filed the challenge on the grounds of duress, lack of independent legal counsel, and procedural impropriety in the execution. The judge assigned to the case was a woman named Honorable Patricia So, who had been on the Cook County domestic bench for 17 years, and who read the execution circumstances of the agreement, 11 p.m., hotel conference room, no independent counsel, with the expression of someone who has seen this exact circumstance many times before. The agreement was voided on April 9th. The settlement conference lasted 2 days. Marisol's attorney and Caden's attorney sat across a long table and negotiated with the particular efficiency of 2 people who both understood that one side had significantly more leverage than the other. By the end of the second day, the terms were agreed. $7.8 million in liquid settlement, full ownership of the Horizon Legacy Awards brand and charitable foundation, and the return of 3 specific items that Marisol had listed in writing and which Caden's attorney had not contested because they were not financially significant. One of them was a box of photographs from a storage unit on the west side, photos from before she had learned to keep nothing in the building where she could be watched, photos of her mother, photos of Tulsa, a photograph of herself at 23, sitting on a porch in Albuquerque with a cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle, squinting into the sun, laughing at something just out of frame. She drove to the storage unit herself on a Saturday morning and loaded the box into the back of a rental car. She sat in the parking lot afterward and opened the box and found the photograph immediately, as if it had been waiting on top. She looked at it for a long time. She did not cry. She had done most of that crying already, in the specific, private way she had always done it, quietly, without audience, in rooms where no one could see. That evening, she opened her laptop and drafted a single email to the Nashville law firm. Please begin the process of transitioning Ashford Meridian Trust to public registration under the legal name Marisol Reyes Vane. It is time for the name to be accurate. She read it twice, changed nothing, and pressed send. Then she opened the drawer in her Pilsen room, the drawer she had not opened in 16 days, and took out the Santa Monica photograph. She looked at it for the last time. Then she placed it at the bottom of the box with her mother's things. Not thrown away, just put in its right place, behind everything that mattered more. 7 months after the gala, on a Saturday in October, Marisol Vane married Stellan Rowe in a ceremony in Albuquerque, New Mexico, in the backyard of Diva Osman's house on the east side of the city. There were 9 people present. There was no venue fee. There was no event planner. There were no peonies flown from Holland, no crystal chandeliers, no $340 centerpiece arrangements. There was a wooden arch that Stellan had built himself in Diva's garage the day before, wrapped in white cotton fabric and dried sage from the garden. There was a folding table from Target with a yellow tablecloth and a casserole of green chili chicken enchiladas that Diva had made that morning, insisting from her kitchen chair, her cardiac rehabilitation still ongoing, her stubbornness completely unaffected, that she was perfectly capable of cooking for 9 people, thank you very much. Marisol wore a white cotton dress that she had bought for $220 from a small boutique on Guadalupe Street. It had a deep pocket on the right side, which had been the deciding factor. Stellan wore a jacket over a clean white shirt. He was not wearing the flannel. He had offered to wear it, half joking, over the phone 2 weeks earlier. Marisol had said, "Save it. I want to know it still exists, but I don't need to see it every important day of my life." He had laughed, the real laugh, not the social one, and she had thought, yes, that is the sound I want to be around. The ceremony was performed by a justice of the peace named Leonard Garza, who had been doing this for 31 years and who read the vows with the brisk warmth of a man who genuinely believed in what he was facilitating. Marisol and Stellan had written their own vows. Marisol's were 4 sentences. Stellan's were 6. Nobody cried until Deva did, from her folding chair in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a kitchen towel she had apparently brought outside by accident and then decided to keep with her. After the ceremony, while plates were being passed and someone had turned on a small Bluetooth speaker playing something slow and warm, Stellan leaned against the wooden arch and watched Marisol talk with Harold Finch, the only vain Orchid contact she had invited, because he was the only one who had ever been honest with her, and she had come to value honesty over history. Finch had flown in from Chicago for the day. He was holding a paper plate and looking at Marisol with the expression of a man re-evaluating a story he thought he had understood. "She's extraordinary," he said to Stellan. "I know," Stellan said. "How long did you know?" Stellan thought about it. 16 years. Give or take the 5 I spent pretending I didn't. Finch nodded slowly. "The board offered her a consulting position," he said. She turned it down. "I know." She recommended 3 internal candidates for the permanent CEO role and sent a 12-page structural memo to the transition committee about the Midwest expansion problems. She charged us nothing. She just sent it. Stellan looked at him. "Did you use it?" "We're implementing the entire thing." Finch paused. "She's better than all of us." "Yes," Stellan said. "She is." Across the backyard, Marisol was holding a plate of enchiladas and laughing at something Finch's deputy had said. It was the laugh that Stellan had first heard in an Oklahoma study group in 2010. Real, sudden, unguarded. The laugh of someone who is not performing ease, but simply experiencing it. The Ashford Meridian Trust had been formally disclosed in late April. The Chicago financial press had covered the story for 3 weeks running. Marisol had given one interview to a reporter from the Tribune named Dana Osai, who had been covering the Vane Orchid story from the beginning and who asked good questions and did not ask her to perform her pain for the camera. The interview had run 2,400 words. The headline was, "She built it from nothing, then she built it again." She had read the article once, on her phone, in the rental car outside the storage unit. Then she put her phone away and drove back to Pilsen. She still lived in Pilsen. She had moved to a larger apartment, 2 windows, a real closet, heat that worked through the night, but the same neighborhood. She liked it. She liked the murals on 18th Street and the tamale cart on Blue Island, and the specific quality of the light over the rooftops in the evening. The trust's assets had grown to $2.4 million in the months since disclosure. She was meeting with a partner at a real estate investment firm in November about the first formal fund offering. She had hired one employee, a 24-year-old named Petra, who had graduated from DePaul with a finance degree and $90,000 in student debt, and who reminded Marisol of herself in a way that she found both encouraging and sobering. As the October sun lowered over Diva's backyard and the enchiladas diminished, and Diva had been convinced, finally, to allow someone else to serve the cake, Stellan found Marisol standing at the edge of the garden, looking out at the mountains that were visible above the roof lines in the distance, blue, grey, and enormous and very calm. He stood beside her. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Are you okay?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yes," she said. "I think this is the first time in a long time that the answer to that is just, yes." He nodded. He took her hand. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, a man who governed an empire and understood that the hardest thing any person governs is themselves. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marisol Vane had not found strength by fighting what happened to her. She had found it by refusing to be defined by it, by building slowly and in secret and without applause the life that she had always been capable of living. She was 31 years old. She had $2.4 million under management, 9 people in her backyard, a husband who still owned a flannel shirt he never threw away, and a D who was cutting cake with a kitchen knife and humming to herself in the October afternoon light. She had come from nothing. She had come from Rosario Reyes on a cold porch in Tulsa, and from a plastic hospital chair, and from a study group in Oklahoma, and from 3 a.m. at a plank desk in Pilsen. Everything she had was exactly what she had built. And she wasn't finished. If this story stayed with you, if something in Marisol's quiet, precise courage reminded you of strength you didn't know you still had, then share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Not for the drama, for the truth underneath it, that the most powerful thing a person can do is keep building, even when no one is watching. I'll see you inside. Here is the closing segment, written in a natural conversational voice, as if speaking directly to the audience. And so, the story comes to a close. My wonderful friends, if you're still here with me right now, after everything we've walked through together, then something in this story must have touched your heart in some way. Maybe it was Marisol's pain. Maybe it was her silence. Maybe it was the way she kept building, quietly, in the dark, when no one was watching and no one was clapping. But if we step back for just a moment and look at this story through a deeper lens, it's really about one thing: the power of building yourself from the inside out, even when the world has decided you don't matter. Marisol didn't explode. She didn't beg. She didn't chase. She simply became, slowly, precisely, without permission, exactly who she had always been capable of being. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. And that is exactly what she did. She couldn't control the betrayal. She couldn't undo the hospital nights alone, the signed papers, the erased name. But she controlled what she built next. That is the lesson for all of us. The people who underestimate you quietly are often doing you the greatest favor, because they leave you alone long enough to become dangerous. If this story meant something to you today, if it reminded you of your own quiet strength, your own unfinished building, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it right now, and subscribe so we can keep telling stories like this one together. Thank you, truly, for being here until the very end. I'll see you inside. Here is the disclaimer paragraph, written naturally to fit the tone of the story. Before we close, I want to take a moment to be transparent with you, because you deserve that. This story is a work of fiction. It was created entirely for storytelling and entertainment purposes. Marisol, Caden, Stellan, Rien, and Diva, every character you met today are imagined. The companies, the events, the legal proceedings, the gala, the numbers, all fictional. None of this represents any real person, living or deceased, or any real organization or event. Any resemblance to actual individuals or circumstances is purely coincidental and completely unintentional. Stories like this exist because human emotions are universal. Betrayal feels the same whether it happens in a penthouse or a small apartment. Resilience looks the same whether the world is watching or not. We create these narratives not to mislead, but to reflect, to give language to experiences that many people carry quietly inside them. That is the only truth this story was ever trying to tell. Thank you for watching. Thank you for trusting us with your time.